I am an optimist.
Is there some of that is aspirational? Like people want to believe that what they want to see is facts and fair-minded journalism, but what gets the outrage machine going and what gets people like flowing around the internet really quickly are the like latest thing to be angry about that's coming from a skewed perspective.
It's definitely a lot easier to hit retweet on something that is inflammatory than something that is reasonable. But you have to be careful. I'll give you a perfect example of this. In any of this product development, we talk about the 1% rule, which is not what you think it is. This holds for every social media website, where 1% of the traffic actually creates all of the content, 9% sort of interacts with it, and then about 90% doesn't do anything. So when you see the floods of tweets, when you see the floods, know that it's 10% or less of the entire body of people actually using the site. And there's this silent majority of who I believe are mostly reasonable people who we're never actually hearing from, even on these democratic platforms.
Although that's an interesting, the 1% rule to apply to what Ezra said, I think correctly, that we got to remember that the largest Fox News audience, Bill O'Reilly, is 2.5 million people. It's nothing. However, that 1% in that case, and the 1% of those passionate ideological audiences have, as never in my lifetime, it is a tail wagging the dog in Washington that has not existed. And because, when you had a mainstream media run by a few white men and Washington run by, mainstream bipartisan thing, you could ignore the wingnuts. The wingnuts can no longer be ignored, and even though they're a tiny audience, they punch way, way, way above their weight in terms of affecting what goes on in Washington.
Let me make 2 quick points on this. One, on this sort of political polarization, the degree that this 1% is wagging the dog. Political polarization, essentially my favorite thing in the world to talk about, and so I'll try to keep it short, but it's only to say that this kind of golden bipartisan age we talk about of the 40s and the 50s and 60s was built atop an ideological extremism of a type that is absolutely abhorrent in America now, which is to say the parties were essentially scrambled because Southern racists were in the Democratic Party and Northern liberals were in the Republican Party. You can't have the kind of party polarization we have if you have Democrats more conservative than Republicans and conservatives or Republicans more liberal than Democrats. But when we equate that era with moderation, right, I think we mix up 2 concepts. I think we mix up ideological moderation and a kind of a procedural party efficacy. This is, I think, a fairly ideologically moderate time if you think about the kinds of issues we were dealing with in the 50s and 60s, even as we're very polarized in Washington. The other point in terms of the degree to which people want fact-based, et cetera, content versus partisan content, the great lie of newspapers, or the great false choice, I think that our strictures have put on this conversation, is that all this content exists on a continuum, where over here is news, and that's fact-based and calm and rational and kind of boring. And over here is opinion, and that's hot and it's interesting, but it doesn't have any facts in it. And I actually think a lot of the examples you bring up, and a lot of what people just want on the internet and want in the media more generally, is on an interestingness continuum.
Totally.
Yeah.
BuzzFeed is not coming up so quickly because they're highly liberal or highly conservative. They are interesting. You go and you are interested, and Reddit is deeply interesting. And there are interesting things happening on both sides of the aisle, and interesting things that have nothing to do with either side of the aisle. But when you talk about the rally to restore sanity and/or fear, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert are interesting, and that was an interesting thing to do for the day. There was really not that much about politics, but it was about going and making silly signs. And I do think, I find that cheering, and I think it is a challenge to this sort of older media or larger outlets, where the way we are going to be able to compete and the way we're going to be able to keep people from falling into filter bubbles is by making our content interesting. And that does not have to mean moving in one direction or the other across that news and opinion spectrum. It is about how we write and how we think about it and how we innovate literally and how we present our stories and how we choose our stories.
Yep.
I think that's absolutely right what you just said, and I have waited for the rehabilitation of CNN to happen by them realizing that it's not that you can be interesting and exciting and without being left-wing or right-wing, right? Do you know? And they just have failed to.
I work for MSNBC, so I'm waiting for the CNN rehabilitation to not happen.